Winter doesn't announce itself with drama. It creeps in quietly, stripping away comfort, layer by layer, until only physics remains. And physics is merciless. When heat leaves your body faster than you can replace it, survival stops being about toughness and starts becoming a matter of understanding. History has already tested these limits for us. During the Battle of the Bulge, thousands of soldiers discovered that cold can defeat an army without firing a single shot. Frostbite cases surged into the tens of thousands. Men weren't just injured, they were erased from combat effectiveness by something as simple as moisture trapped in the wrong place. Yet in that same frozen landscape, a smaller group endured. It's not because they had better equipment, but because they understood something deeper about how heat actually behaves. That understanding still applies today, whether you're outdoors or sitting inside your home during a blackout. This is not a story about history alone. It's a working survival system. The failure of 1944 wasn't just logistical, it was conceptual. Allied command under leaders like Dwight D. Eisenhower prioritized speed over preparation. Supplies were stretched thin, and winter gear became secondary to ammunition and fuel. The assumption was simple. The war would end before winter mattered. That assumption collapsed the moment temperatures dropped across the Ardennes. Soldiers entered one of the harshest European winters in decades, wearing boots that looked modern on paper but failed catastrophically in practice. Leather absorbed water. Waterproofing compounds trapped sweat. And once moisture entered the system, it became the enemy within. Cold injuries surged, not because soldiers were careless, but because their gear misunderstood the basic laws of heat transfer. To understand why, you have to strip away the myths about warmth. Insulation doesn't generate heat, preserves it. Materials like wool or down work because they trap pockets of dry, still air. That air resists heat movement, slowing the escape of warmth from your body. But the moment water enters that system, everything changes. Water conducts heat far more efficiently than air, pulls warmth away rapidly, collapsing the insulating effect entirely. This is exactly what happened inside those boots. Soldiers marched, their bodies produced heat, and their feet began to sweat. That moisture had nowhere to go. It moved outward into their socks, and in sub-zero temperatures, it hit a critical boundary where vapor turned back into liquid. That point, what scientists call the dew point, formed inside their insulation, not outside it. The result was devastating. Socks became saturated, insulation collapsed, moisture froze. And what had been protection turned into a frozen shell, draining heat from the body. This isn't a historical anomaly, it's a universal rule. When insulation becomes wet, it stops insulating. That applies just as much to a sleeping bag, a jacket, or even blankets during a winter outage. If moisture infiltrates your insulating layers, your body heat will be pulled away faster than you can replace it. That's the real enemy, not the cold air itself, but the hidden movement of water within your system. The soldiers who survived longer understood this, even if they couldn't explain it in scientific terms. Their solution was counterintuitive. Instead of trying to keep their feet dry, they focused on keeping their insulation dry. This led to what we now call the vapor barrier principle. It sounds wrong at first, because it goes against everything modern outdoor gear promotes. But in extreme cold, it works with brutal efficiency. The idea is simple: stop moisture before it reaches your insulation. They improvised, using whatever materials they had. A layer of grease or oil was applied to the skin, not for warmth but to protect it from constant moisture exposure. Ouch. A thin liner sock held that layer in place. Then came the critical component, a barrier that moisture could not pass through. Soldiers used waxed paper, ration wrappers, even scraps of rubberized material. Over that, they wore their insulating wool socks. The result was a sealed system. Sweat remained trapped close to the skin, unable to migrate outward. The insulation stayed completely dry, and because it stayed dry, it retained its full insulating power. Inside that barrier, something unexpected happened. The environment became warm and humid, reducing further sweating. It wasn't comfortable, but it was stable, and stability meant survival. The difference between a frozen foot and a functioning one came down to whether the insulation remained dry. This principle remains just as effective today. A simple plastic barrier, something as basic as a bag, can replicate the same effect in extreme conditions. It's not about comfort, it's It's about controlling where moisture goes. But moisture wasn't the only threat. The ground itself was an even more relentless enemy. Frozen earth doesn't just feel cold, it acts as an infinite heat sink, pulling warmth away continuously. Soldiers standing in foxholes experienced heat loss not just from the air, but from below. Their boots provided little protection against this conduction. Heat flowed directly from their bodies into the ground, draining them from the feet up. The solution, once again, came from improvisation. Corrugated cardboard, often discarded as waste, became a critical tool. Its internal structure traps layers of air, creating a barrier against heat transfer. By placing cardboard inside their boots or beneath their feet, soldiers created a thermal break. Heat loss slowed. Warmth lasted longer. Others used dried grass or crumpled paper for the same purpose. The material didn't matter as much as the principle. Introduce trapped air between your body and the cold surface. This lesson translates directly into modern scenarios. During a power outage, the floor of your home can become a silent drain on your body heat. Sitting or sleeping directly on a cold surface accelerates heat loss dramatically. Adding more blankets on top won't fix the problem if heat is escaping downward. What matters is creating a barrier underneath anything that traps air and interrupts that flow of heat. The principle remains unchanged from the Ardennes to your living room. There was another mistake that cost soldiers dearly, and it's one that persists today. When people feel cold, their instinct is to tighten everything. They lace boots tightly, layer clothing until movement is restricted, and compress insulation in the process. But warmth doesn't come from pressure. It comes from circulation. Blood is the only thing carrying heat to your extremities. Restrict that flow, and no amount of insulation will save you. Veterans learned to loosen their boots, allowing space for movement and blood flow. Toes that could move stayed warmer. Circulation remained intact. Combined with dry insulation and a barrier against the ground, this created a complete survival system. Tightness, which felt like protection, was actually cutting off the very heat supply they depended on. These hard-earned lessons didn't disappear after the war. They reshaped military design. The U.S. Army eventually developed vapor barrier boots, commonly known as Mickey Mouse boots, which applied the same principles in a standardized form. These boots sealed insulation away from moisture entirely, ensuring it remained dry regardless of external conditions. Even decades later, in extreme cold environments, they outperform many modern designs that prioritize breathability over moisture control. The reason is simple. In moderate conditions, breathability helps manage sweat. In extreme cold, it becomes a liability. Moisture that escapes slowly still freezes within insulation. The laws of thermodynamics don't change based on marketing or technology. They remain constant, whether in a war zone or a modern home. This brings the lesson into the present. Most people are not preparing for a battlefield, but many are unprepared for a prolonged winter outage. When heating systems fail, the same physics begins to take control. Moisture from your body can infiltrate blankets and clothing. Heat can drain into floors and walls. Circulation can be restricted by overlayering. Without understanding these processes, people often make their situation worse while trying to stay warm. The solutions are not complex, but they require discipline. Controlling moisture becomes the priority. Protecting insulation from that moisture becomes the goal. Creating barriers against heat loss, both above and below, becomes essential.
Ow.
And maintaining circulation ensures that the heat your body produces actually reaches where it's needed. There's one final lesson that history makes clear, and it has nothing to do with materials or techniques. It's discipline. Units that avoided catastrophic cold injuries didn't just rely on improvisation, they enforced routines. Soldiers were required to check their feet, change socks, and actively manage their condition, even in the worst circumstances. Leaders like George S. Patton understood that small, consistent actions prevented irreversible damage. Neglect, even for a short time, could lead to permanent loss. Survival in the cold is not passive, demands action, even when every instinct tells you to stay still and conserve energy. It requires accepting discomfort in the short term to prevent disaster in the long term. That mindset, more than any single technique, is what separated those who endured from those who didn't. History often gets reduced to maps and timelines. But its real value lies in the details, the small decisions that determined whether someone made it through the night. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, survival came down to waxed paper, cardboard, and an understanding of how heat actually works. Those same principles are just as relevant today. The environment hasn't changed. The physics hasn't changed. Only our awareness of them has. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Warmth is not about piling on layers. It's about managing moisture, preserving insulation, and controlling how heat moves through your environment. Get those right, and you give yourself a real advantage against the cold. If you want more breakdowns like this, real historical lessons you can actually use, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who takes preparedness seriously. Because the next time the cold sets in, the difference won't be luck. It'll be whether you understood the rules before you needed them.